You are listening to the One Day at a Time podcast. On this podcast, my guests share their stories of alcoholism, addiction, and how they recovered so that you can too. My hope is that you find the inspiration and resources you need to let go of what's holding you back so that you can transform into the person you were always meant to be. Ready? Here we go. Hey friend, welcome to the podcast. In case we haven't met yet, my name is Arlina and I'll be your host. Today, I am joined again by my friend John Loxley, who is also a podcaster. He's a prolific writer. He's a father and person in long-term recovery. This is actually his third time joining me on the podcast. I absolutely love talking with John. He's a deep thinker, a philosopher, but also super down to earth. In this episode, John shares what it was like to leave his program behind when he vacationed in Turkey, how his mental health was affected, and what he did to feel grounded again. This is a wide-ranging conversation covering topics like why he quit drinking, the way he discovered spirituality, and 3 amazing stories of how his higher power works in his life. I always get so much out of my time speaking with John, and I know you will too. So without further delay, please enjoy this episode with John and let me know what you think. John, thanks so much for joining me today.
Hi, Arlina. Nice to see you, as always.
What time is it there?
It's 4 p.m.
4 p.m. You're in the UK. I'm sitting in Idaho, so gotta love technology for that.
Yeah, it's always the wonders of technology that allow us to speak.
Yeah, listen, I have such a love-hate relationship with it because on one hand, it could be super helpful. On the other hand, it can be a little annoying, but here we are.
Well, ironically, I was just panicking then because the computer that I was using to speak to you on Zoom wasn't working. So that's the reason why I'm on my phone.
Oh, well, it turned out pretty good because you're coming in clear and sounds
That's
good,
good.
so we're all good.
Good. Good stuff.
And I love how when I invited you to be a guest, you're just like, sure, no questions, no like pre-planning.
Yeah. I was in Turkey at the time. I was on holiday when you sent the email, and yeah, I'll always say yes to having a conversation with you anyway, but it didn't even cross my mind that I might want to think about what we'll be discussing. I always know that we'll just have a really good conversation. So I just yeah, cool.
Yeah. No, I love talking with you. I feel like I love your thought process. Like you're a deep thinker, which I appreciate, right? And
Yeah,
you've written 2 books now?
I've written 7 actually.
Oh, I'm sorry. I totally
So
shortchanged you there. 7. Oh my gosh.
yeah, I self-published um 6 of them, and one of them was published through O Books, but 5 out of the 6 were like kind of all to do with addiction and spirituality, and a lot of my stories are in there. And then one book was just like I did when I first got into coaching, and I was like, oh my god, I love coaching, and I just like banged out this coaching book, which was just basically, I wasn't exactly plagiarism, but it was just copying everybody else's ideas and just like throwing them into this one book. Um, and it was, of the 7, the one that got published is definitely the best, and it's the one that I put the most effort into. And I think, like, I know you, is this your first book that you're just finishing now?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, I know that, like, I think that I imagine the amount of kind of effort and time that you've put into this one book is what I wished I would have done, with kind of like, rather than write 7 books, I wish I'd have just written one book that had everything in it. But
Mm.
I'm just the typical addict, and just very impulsive and very it's got to be done now. I've got no patience, so I was like banging books out for years, and then once I got the one published, I was like, okay, I'm done.
I'm done.
I haven't,
I'm
I haven't,
done.
I haven't written a word since.
That is so funny. But I have to say the reason it has taken me so long is the first draft that I did of the book. I sent it to a developmental editor, and her feedback was so it hurt my feelings. It hurt all my feelings. But I think it hurt my feelings because she was right, because she was like, you sound really angry. She's like, how are you going? Yeah, I know, sweet little me angry. Listen, that bitch is just under the surface, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah,
But but she was like, you know what? It's necessary. She's like, she's like, you did the hard work of like, creating the clay, and now you need to mold it. And I think
mm,
my anger was just this frustration that I have that over, I've been sober a long time, and, podcasting for 8 years, and just the amount. And this is what one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was recovery resistance,
mm,
like this natural resistance people have to change, to overcoming fear, to letting go of their belief systems. It's almost like people want the transformation, but within their belief system. Like,
yeah.
it's like, don't, I want to believe everything that I believe, um, but I want a complete transformation. So it's, and I
I'm
think
not.
that's what
I'm
came
not sure that
out.
people. Sorry, I was just going to say just on that point. I'm not sure that people understand that there is going to be a transformation initially.
Oh,
You
tell me
know, I think.
more.
Well, I mean, I was talking about this last night. I actually went to a meeting last night, and I was sharing about how um, I've been talking to a sponsee earlier in the day, and the sponsee was talking about how his family weren't he's finding it really difficult living with his family and interacting with his family since he got sober. And, it's been a few years, but like he's changed loads and they haven't changed and stuff like that. And I was saying to him, but this is kind of what you have to accept is you either you have to completely drop people out of your life because they're not good for you anymore. You have to try to help them to come on the journey with you and this journey of change if that's what they want to do, or you just have to completely accept that they're not going to change but be happy with that and comfortable with how they are, um because he's fully accepted that he is on a journey of change. But I'm not sure that everybody that comes into recovery understands that initially and accepts the fact that you can't just put the drink or the drugs down or the behavior down and then just carry on how you were.
Right.
You actually have to then start to change, start to look at all the areas of your life. And that's a lifelong process.
Yeah.
You've been sober a long time. I've been sober um, 14 years. And even now, like, there's still a lot of things that I still need to work on and still need to change. And they, like when I said that I went to Turkey for a couple of weeks. Well, I made the very classic mistake of going on holiday and leaving my program at home.
Mm.
So like a week into my holiday, I started to feel restless, irritable, and discontent. By 10 days, I really was not well, and then I actually got
Mm.
food poisoning, and I was really, really, really unwell, both
Wow.
physically and mentally. Um, but it was a massive eye opener. It was like I am literally. I mean, I was very fortunate that the idea of a drink didn't come into my mind, but because I was in an all inclusive hotel, it would have been very easy to pick up a drink. Um, but but the the depths that my mental health went to in such a short space of time, because I wasn't doing the normal things like praying and meditating and taking inventory and speaking to people. I wasn't doing any of that stuff. I was really, really unwell by the time I came back. Like I literally sprinted to my local AA meeting when I got home, and
Mhm.
I did I think I did like 4 AA meetings in the space of a week, and really, really had to get my head back into things. So I'm at this meeting last night, and I was sharing, and I was just saying, like, I'm fully accepting that I have to change and that I'm on this journey of change, and this is a lifelong thing. And if you kind of come into any form of recovery and you don't accept that that is how it is, I think eventually you'll start to either go backwards and start to pick up a lot of the old behaviors, or eventually you'll pick up again, whether it's drink or drugs. um and we're seeing that a lot. I don't know how it is, over in the States, but we're seeing that a lot in the UK. It's very, very, um, it's very clear that there's a lot of new people coming into recovery, like, probably more than there ever has been. But then there's a lot of people that aren't sticking around and that are relapsing, um, and it's because I think they don't have that acceptance around it.
The acceptance of that they need to continue to evolve.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and to do the necessary things initially to start making those changes. So, I was speaking to a woman that, she's 5 years around. I really like her. She's really, really struggling. And I hear her week in, week out. She gets 3 days, she picks up a drink. She gets a week, she picks up a drink. She gets a few months, she picks up a drink. And I just went over to her at the end of the meeting the other night, and I said, look, I said, I'm not. Please, this is coming from a place of love. I just don't want to see you keep going through this pain anymore. I said, have you got a sponsor? And she said, yeah. I said, do you speak to your sponsor? She said, not often enough. I said, have you started the steps? She said, no. I said, right. Well, I said, as soon as you leave this meeting, I said, I want you to ring your sponsor. I want you to tell your sponsor that you want to start the steps this week. And if your sponsor says that she can't do it, go and find another sponsor.
Yeah.
I said, you need to do this. And then I spoke to her a bit about, the process of what happens when you go through the steps. And then I asked one of my old sponsees to come over and speak to her. And I just said, just talk to her about what what happened for you. And he's like 3 years sober, full of the joys of spring. He's got a really strong program. And he was just like, look, and he kind of gave her not the hard sell, but he just told her, like, you either do this or you're done. You'll end up drinking again. You'll end up killing yourself. It's only negative, that direction. And she took it on board. Saw her again at the meeting last night. She starts the steps on Saturday. So it's like, and I guarantee that if she continues on that track, that within the next 3 to 6 months, she'll be really happy, and her
Yeah.
life will have completely changed. And it won't be that anything external has changed. It'll be a mental state will have changed. She'll have some relief, um, from the torture, because it is torture.
Yeah.
I absolutely experienced the torture of how I must have felt 15 years ago and previous, when I was in the throes of addiction. That must have been how my head was, because I forget that it must have been that bad.
Yeah.
Um, and it was horrible. It's absolutely
Yeah.
horrible.
It was horrible. That's so interesting. I mean, it reminds me, one of the things I talk about in my book is the difference between meetings and the program, because meetings are not the program. The
No.
program is the steps. Like listen, I love meetings. I'm one of those people who likes meetings. I just like going to a place where I can hug 10 people, in a single evening. And just hear lots of stories and connect, and that's where I can be of service and recognize that all those painful memories that I have were not for nothing, right? Like I can share those things and help somebody else feel at ease. And I think it's just so interesting that, the resistance people have to actually doing the work. Like showing up at meetings is great, but it's the actual pen to paper of the writing exercises. Like I didn't know that the 12 steps were largely a writing exercise. There's some reading, lots of writing, which allowed me to do that self-reflection. That's what came out in my writing, reflect back on my life and reflect back on, why I was doing this. And I was going to ask you, instead of doing the traditional, experience, strength, and hope, I thought it'd be kind of fun to talk about some war stories and talk about, what are some of those memories that we have? Like I have one specific memory in mind that I'm like, I will never drink again because I will never experience that kind of humiliation again. Do you have some of those? Of course you do, but what are some of your memories that keep you sober?
Um, Yeah, I've got lots, but I mean, the most prominent memory would be my last drink, which I think is probably the most important one to remember. Because
Yeah.
they say, don't they, that if you forget your last drink, then you could possibly drink again. So I have a very good memory of what that drink was like. And just one thing before I talk about that I wanted to say, that what you were saying about writing things down, and the program. Again, this goes back to people not being fully prepared for what is actually um, needed in order to start the process of recovery. So there was a woman sharing at the meeting last night who said that she just visited Scotland, and that in Scotland it's very, very militant. It's like really focused on the newcomer. It's like they don't take any BS. It's like she said very much more like American recovery than the UK recovery. And the words she used was, she said, the UK recovery for me is getting watered down, and I agree with that. And I think that the reason why it's getting watered down is because I think there's quite a lot of people around, and especially the meetings that we go to, that haven't necessarily been through the steps um, in a formalized way, or with maybe just not with a sponsor that knew what they were doing, that knew how to do it properly. Like, I was very lucky that I had a sponsor initially when I first came into recovery that took me through the steps, and had a very good sponsor himself. And then I went through the steps again after a year with a guy that had been around for about 30 odd years, and it was even more in depth the second time. And so I felt like I had a really good grounding in the history of AA, and the reason why I was doing the steps, and how it worked, and how it's going to help me moving forward. Hence the reason why I've kind of like maintained my program throughout. People aren't necessarily getting that when they come into the rooms. They're not like, it's a suggested program. Yeah, okay, it's a suggested program, but it's suggested like, if I throw you out of an airplane at 16,000 feet and you've got a parachute on your back, I suggest that you pull that cord before you go down too far. That's
Yeah.
the suggestion for me. Like, it's not, oh, just do it if you want to, don't do it if you don't want to. It like, and I read, obviously I've read your book, and it wasn't an in-depth read. It was like a bit of a skim read. Um, to try to give you a little bit of feedback before it went to publishing, but I really liked what you've written, like, and all the things that you said in there is basically what I'm talking about now. Is like, don't be put off. Like, there's loads of reasons why people are put off by the language, I don't know, like, just the idea of doing the steps. I think it needs to be like really put across to people and to newcomers that this is essential. Like, if you don't do this program, if you come into recovery and all you do is go to meetings, you're not going to get well. You're just not going to get well. Like, you will change a bit, and you see it. Like, you see people change, you see people get more positive. But as you said earlier, meetings aren't life. Like, you've got to then go out and live life. And if you haven't got a program to deal with life, very, very quickly it's going to affect you in negative ways, and very, very quickly you're going to start. You're going to end up picking up. And that kind of leads me into my stories, my war stories. Like, the last drink I had. So prior to my last drink, I'd spent probably a couple of years knowing that I had a problem, but desperately trying to do something about it. So um, I would do things like I would try and exercise the problem away. So I'd be like, right, I'd swear off alcohol. I'd be like, I'm not drinking for a month. And during that month, I'd be running every night. I'd be going to the gym every day. I was I was a DJ at the time, so I was very into music. So I'd just be obsessed with like making music and recording mixes and all that kind of stuff. But what I didn't realize at the time was that I was just so completely and utterly wrapped up in my own mind. Like, there wasn't really any level of awareness outside of myself. So I wasn't really aware of how my behavior used to affect people. I wasn't really aware of how these addictive tendencies had such a detrimental effect on my relationships, especially the woman that I was with at the time. And now I know what that looks like from the outside looking into it, which is complete, just selfishness and basically insanity, like a level of self-obsession and craziness that only comes from the person that is an addict who's in the throes of addiction. To look back on that now is like, whoa, can't quite believe that was me, but it was, and that's how I was. And then inevitably what would happen is I'd think, I'll just have a drink. I'll just have a drink. I'll just have a couple of drinks. I never used to think I'll just have one because I always knew that I wouldn't just have one. But I'd just think I'll just go to the pub with my mates and I'll just have a couple of pints. Now, I was able to do that. Like I could go to the pub, have a couple of beers, and then go home. But then the next time I went out and I thought I would have a couple of beers, then it wouldn't happen. So inevitably there would come a time where I would have the drink and then it would snowball and then I would end up, one memory I have towards the end of my drinking, I went out on a Friday night. I said to my partner, I'm going out for a couple of beers. Sunday morning, I'm on the doorstep at 5 o'clock in the morning on my doorstep of my flat, and my girlfriend was walking over me to go to work because she was working on the Sunday, and she was just like, "Where the hell have you been? I've been worried sick." And I was still completely off my face because I'd gone out for that drink on the Friday. I'd ended
Wow.
up going to a club, then back to an after party. I'd been in this after party all through Saturday and then into Sunday morning. So I'd had something in my drink that had completely knocked me out and woke up out of a blackout, just thinking, "Oh my God, I need to get home." And then I think I jumped in a taxi and then I managed to get myself home. Um, so that was an example, and then there was all the examples around that time as well of having a drink on any random evening and waking up out of blackout driving my car on the motorway. So I'd just like wake up and I'd be in my car driving, and usually because I lived in Leeds and I'm from Manchester originally, which is over the Pennines, I would usually be driving towards Manchester from Leeds. So obviously somewhere in the subconscious, I wanted to go home. I was like wanting to go back, and that happened a few times as well. But the
Like
last
you're
night,
like you're driving and in the middle of driving, you kind of come to.
yeah,
Like, I have a
yeah,
funny story. A friend of mine was asleep and in his sleep, he heard this weird noise. It was like this grinding noise. And he was like, "What the fuck is that?" And he opened his eyes. He was on the freeway driving and his car was bumping up against the rail. And the
oh,
sound of his car grinding against the rail is what woke him up.
whoa.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Well, I drove around there was a shop round the corner, and I drove around the shop one night and just bumped it straight into a bollard. I was like,
What?
just like these concrete things are called bollards. It's just like to stop you going down the pathway. So it's like a big concrete thing.
Oh, yeah,
And I
yeah.
just drove around the corner. I literally could have walked there in about 30 seconds. And I got in my car, drove round and plowed my car into a bollard, and then got out of my car and I was like, what the fuck am I doing? And I didn't even, just anyway. So yeah, those types of things were happening. And then the last drink that I had, so my my partner had decided like we need to get away. We need to get away from Leeds because clearly Leeds is the problem. That's where you go out and do all your drinking.
Leads is
If
the
you
problem.
yeah, if we
Got
get
it.
away from there, then surely things are going to be better. So we decided that we're going to go and live in Australia. We'll do a proper geographical and move to the other side of the world. Um, so we booked the tickets and we booked a stop off in Thailand on the way there, and the plan it was just a one-way ticket. So we were deciding whether we were actually going to emigrate when we got out there. We were thinking we might not come back. So the night before we left, we were having a few drinks at her sister's flat, staying there, and then the following night we were going to stay at the airport, and then we were going to fly to Thailand. So I go to the shop to buy obviously the alcohol for the evening, and I came back with there was four of us having a drink and we're having a game of cards and stuff. And I went to the shop and I bought four bottles of red wine. Obviously, we were going to need one each, aren't we? And I bring these
It's
bottles
only
back.
four glasses.
Yeah. I bring these bottles back, and they're kind of like get some funny looks, like we're just having a quiet drink, and I'm like, yeah, but we don't want to run
It's
out.
wine.
Exactly. I think I must have polished off probably two of the bottles myself. And the last thing that I remember is that I was sat on the sofa. They were all playing cards at the table, the dining room table, and I was sat on the sofa, and I had my headphones in, and I was listening. I was at my laptop, and I was listening to old '90s rap music that I used to be into when I was a kid. And why that's quite pertinent, I think, is because like that was what I used to do. I used to just completely isolate myself in a room. Like when I was like with my partner on her own, or whether I was at a party, or wherever I was, I would eventually isolate myself because I just wanted to be on my own with what I was, like very insular. So that's the last thing I remember. Actually, I remember looking at them playing cards, and the look of kind of disappointment on my partner's face, really. And it was nothing. I mean, as far as I'm aware, nothing crazy happened. I woke up the next morning. That was the last thing I remember. So I blacked out, and then I woke up the next morning. My partner wasn't in bed with me. She'd already got up, but I remember her face of disappointment and thinking to myself, I just can't do this anymore. And it was like I thought the cat's out of the bag now, because they've seen how I drink social, like just normally, like when I'm on my own, which is alcoholically. Um, and I got out of bed and I walked towards the bathroom, and my partner and her sister were in the bathroom brushing their teeth, having a conversation. And a sister said to my partner, "Oh, you hate it when he gets like that, don't you?" And she said, "Yeah, I'm going to leave him if he carries on, because when we get to Thailand, she said the last time we went to Thailand, he went missing for days, which I did. I literally went into the jungle to get some tattoos, and I went missing and
Oh
just went
my
off
God, that
on
is so scary.
and just left her on the beach in Thailand and didn't come back for like a full day. So she said, if he does anything like that again, she said, I'm just going to come home. And that was actually my rock bottom, Arlina. I actually heard that, and I just thought, I just can't do this anymore. And I went back into the into the bedroom, and just the automatic thing that I did was I got down on my knees and I just started praying, and I just said, I can't do this anymore. Please, can you help me? And I just repeated that numerous times. And then I stood up, and I just felt like something around my heart had just dislodged. Like it was like there was some sort of relief I felt from saying that prayer. And my partner came back into the bedroom, and I turned around and I said, "Look, I don't know what happened last night, but I'm really sorry. I'm just not going to drink anymore." And she said, "Well, what do you mean by that?" And I said, "I'm done." I said, I'm done with it. I'm not going to drink anymore." And she said, "Well, you've said this loads of times." And I said, "Yeah, but I genuinely mean it." And she said, "Well, just don't drink in Thailand." She said, "If you just don't drink in Thailand, we'll be okay. And then when we get to Australia, you could see how you get on." Um, and that's what happened. I got out there. I went to bed that night in the airport, in Heathrow Airport, before we flew to Thailand the next day. I had the best night's sleep I've ever had in my life. It was literally like, how I say it is like the war was over in my mind, because there was no, am I going to drink? Am I not going to drink? It was like the decision had been made. And, you hear people talk about this in the rooms all the time, but it's my experience is that the obsession for alcohol had been completely removed from me. And that to me is a miracle, to go from being absolutely obsessed with it one day to the next day being free from it. And the only difference was I said a prayer. So when I was in the airport, off the back of saying this prayer and feeling the way I felt, I actually picked up a book called The World's Religions. And this is a book by Hudson Smith. And this was the beginning of my spiritual journey, really, because I thought, well, let's find out about religion and God and spirituality and see what this is all about. So I read that book from cover to cover on the flight to Thailand. And by the time I got to Thailand, I'd I for me, I was convinced that there definitely was some sort of a higher power, but that religion wasn't for me because I just felt like religion was, kind of adult people's way of trying to explain the mystery, essentially. Um,
Mhm.
so then the next book that I bought when I got out to Australia was a book called The Atheist Book of Spirituality. Um, and I read that from cover to cover. And, by the time I'd finished that book, I was kind of like, I'm not an atheist, but I definitely believe in a higher power. So there's something. Um, and then some very, very weird things happened when I was over there, which basically convinced me that there is a God, which I can go into if you want to. But
Yeah, give me an example of what I mean, I call them God shots or like these moments of serendipity or
yeah, well, there's three things that happened, and they were quite mind blowing, really. So as I said, like by the time I'd read this atheist book of spirituality, I was kind of like, um, I was agnostic basically. I was on the
right.
fence, but I was definitely believe that there was something. Um, when when we were in Thailand, I had absolutely no desire to drink whatsoever. I'm surrounded by alcohol, no desire to drink. Get to Australia, and we initially settled in Melbourne. And my partner started working in this kind of like high fashion store in on the outskirts of Melbourne city centre. And I got quite friendly with the people that worked there for obviously through her. And her manager, a guy called Tony, who looked like some sort of kind of like mafia boss. He was this kind of Portuguese, 6 foot, big guy, grey hair, like kind of guy you didn't want to mess with. But he was just this lovely bloke, and he was a born again Christian. So I got talking to him one day, and I just said to him, "How come you're a born again Christian?" And he said, "Oh, it's a crazy story." He said, "My best friend's daughter was swimming in the swimming pool, and she drowned, and my best friend dragged her out of the swimming pool, gave her the kiss of life. She didn't come back to life. And he basically got down on his knees and he prayed and he said, God, he said, if you bring her back to me, I'll give away all my wealth because he was a very wealthy guy. He said, I'll work for charity. I'll do anything. Gave her the kiss of life again and she came back to life. And he followed through. So he became a born again Christian and gave away his money and just started working for the church and stuff. And
Wow.
Tony, upon hearing this, was just instantly converted and became a born again Christian as well. And he just said to me, he said, why do you ask? And I said, well, this is what's happened to me. I said, I was an alcoholic, and I said I got down on my knees and I prayed, and now I don't want to drink anymore. And he said, sounds like you've had like a spiritual experience. And I said, well, I want to know more about, God and understand it. But I said, I don't really know where to start. And he just said, ask for a sign. He said, if you want to believe, you just ask for a sign and you'll get one. So I said, okay then. So I walked home from that conversation, and whilst I was on the way home, I said a prayer and I just said, right, God, if you exist, then give me a sign. So earlier that day, prior to this conversation, I'd done my usual routine of going into work, switching on my computer, going onto Facebook, checking if there were any messages from home, like seeing what was going on back in the UK, sending a few messages and that. Um, so I'd done exactly that. But the only difference was that the idea of an old friend of mine had popped into my mind, a woman called Angela, who we were born in the same hospital when we, at birth in Manchester. The last time we saw each other was on our 18th birthday when we got together, and by this point I was like 29, so it was 10 years later. She just popped into my mind. I searched for her on Facebook, I couldn't find her. Searched for her on Google, etc. Couldn't find her. The morning after I asked for a sign, I went into work, logged onto my computer, switched on Facebook, and there was a friend request waiting from her.
Oh, fuck.
So I was like, I nearly fell off my chair, as you can imagine. And I was like, oh my God. So I answered this friend request.
Oh my God, literally.
Yeah, accept. Go onto her page and I start looking at her pictures and, like what she's up to and stuff. And I'm like, I'm sure that's Australia. I'm sure she's in Australia. So I send her a message saying, "Look, I think you might be in Australia. I'm in Australia. This is my number. Give me a call." She rang me that night, and it turned around. She lived around the corner in Australia from where we lived. The weird thing was that we just decided to go traveling. So we literally, I think the next day we were leaving to go traveling, and also she was going doing some traveling as well. So we never actually got to see each other in Australia. We saw each other again in London about a year or so later. So that was the first thing that happened, which obviously I asked for a sign, and that happens. Then, just as we're a couple of days prior to us leaving, I'd had a conversation with another woman that worked with my partner at this shop. And she was just telling us about she had a sister that this lady was a black lady, and that'll become the reason why I say that in a minute. Black lady she worked with called Rosemary, and she'd said that she had a sister that lived in Alice Springs who was pregnant. She just told me that randomly. And then she also said that because of my newfound sobriety and wanting to like do more work on myself and stuff, she said there's this book called Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, and it's all small stuff. And she said, I'll send you. She said, if you can't find a copy of it, I'll send you a copy of it when you get back to the UK. So I was like, brilliant. So I said our goodbyes to her, and off we go traveling. And we we flew into the center of Australia, and then we hired a car to drive right up the middle, and we had to go through Alice Springs to get to where we were going. So as we were getting towards Alice Springs, I said to my partner, I said, I bet you that we're going to see Rosemary's sister here. And she was like, why would we see Rosemary's sister? There's like 25,000 people in this town. She's like, there's no way we're going to see her. And I said, I've just got this feeling that we're going to bump into her. So we pull up in the car park to go to the supermarket to just get some supplies. And as I'm walking into the car park, there's this pregnant black woman walking towards me. And I said, there she is. And she was like, what? I was like, that is definitely her. So she looks just like her. So I said, I'm going to go and say hello. She was like, no, don't say hello. I was like, I'm going to go and say hello. So I went over to her and I said, is your name such and such thing? Have you got a sister called Rosemary that lives in Melbourne? And she was like, yeah. And she's like, she thought it was like candid camera or something,
Right,
She's like freaked out. And I said, I know this is weird. There is no cameras. I said, it's just that my partner's been working with your sister for the last 6 months in Melbourne. I said, and I just had this feeling that we was going to see you. So obviously it was weird. And she was like, okay. And we kind of like went our separate ways. Like when we'd see her in the supermarket, she'd like go the other way. And then,
that was at the start of your trip. So you had to bump into her a bunch of times.
No, just in the supermarket. We didn't bump into her anywhere else. It was just in the supermarket.
But how awkward to like be in the same grocery store and you go around the aisle. Oh, there he is again.
Yeah. It literally was like that. Like I saw her and I was like, oh, yeah.
Hi.
So that was the second thing that happened. And then the third thing that happened is we travel up north. We get to the final destination of where we wanted to stay for a while, a place called Exmouth. And we went to this caravan site and we wanted to get jobs as cleaners so that we could live there for free and just and work and just save some money. And the caravan site that we wanted to stay at, it was booked up until for one more night, and then there was rooms had become available the next day, and there was also jobs available. So we were like, cool, we'll come back tomorrow. We'll go and stay at the caravan site over the road.
For the Yanks, can you tell us what a caravan is?
A caravan is like a motorhome. A motorhome. But you have stationary homes and you have motorhomes. So a caravan is like a home that you can drive from place to place, and then they're like chalets basically. Like like a chalet. So and tents as well. So they've got we had a tent. So it's it's
kind of like a campsite.
Yes. Yeah. A campsite. Yeah.
I mean, so I've seen Snatch. The movie Snatch, where they talk about a caravan. But I was like, I had this like sneaking suspicion that some of my friends are going to be like, what?
Yeah. What? So I go over the road and I set up my tent in this campsite. And I'm quite disgruntled because it was a bit dirty and, and I'm disgruntled. Didn't really want to spend the night there. Would have rather have been in the nice caravan site that I was going to be in the next day. But anyway, I just put the tent up, and then I said to my partner, I said, I'm just going to go and change my book at the book exchange. So I walk into this place, hand my book to the lady, and go over to the shelf at the back of the room. And the first book that I picked up was Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, and it's all small stuff. So I was like, WTF, like I was like, oh my God. And the irony of it was because if you bear in mind that at that point I was probably about 6 to 7 months without a drink, but no program. So I wasn't, I was sober, but I wasn't, like particularly well in terms of
You
like,
hadn't had a methodology or a practice to help you
yeah,
sort through all your emotional baggage, shall we say?
I'd had a spiritual experience, but I hadn't had a spiritual awakening. That was what had
Oh,
happened.
interesting. Yeah.
And so I didn't. So even though these three things had happened, I didn't really put two and two together and be like, oh yeah, God's, like God's kind of like there.
You're all,
It was,
show me a sign. And then you run into
yeah,
Rosemary's Pregnant Sister and you're like, I don't know what that was.
yeah,
Something weird happened. What was that? I don't
yeah,
know.
yeah. Well, it wasn't until I came back to the UK eventually. So actually, so where this story ends is so these three things happened, and then we then moved to the other caravan site, get the jobs as cleaners, and we're saving money. We're living in this blissful place, and the same thing that happened to me in Turkey happened to me there, which is I got restless, irritable, and discontent, full of resentment, full of fear, full of rage, and I nearly picked up a drink. Desperately didn't want to drink, so I was looking for things. I was exercising every day again. I was crazy in my own mind. I was looking for some sort of an outlet, and randomly I found a bag of cannabis in the toilets. There was this guy that was a proper big weed smoker, and he'd left this bag of cannabis in there.
Amateur.
And I took this bag and I took it to the beach and I rolled a spliff and I smoked this spliff on the beach and I felt absolutely horrendous. Like I felt so weed never was good for me, and I just felt awful. So I got back to the caravan and I got in bed and I wrote in my diary that night that I will never drink or take drugs ever again because it just doesn't work, So the morning after that is my sobriety day. Actually, like my sobriety day initially when I first came into recovery was the morning after my last drink.
Sure.
But I consider that spliff as being my last drink because if it could have been alcohol, it could have been anything. But I smoked a spliff and it didn't work, and then my mental health just deteriorated from there. And by the time 3 months later that I got back to the UK, I was suicidal. I was literally like homicidal and suicidal. I just wanted to kill everybody around me. I couldn't deal with people. Just hated life and was just thinking like I'd rather not be here. And that was when I rang my dad and I just told my dad what was going on, and he just said, maybe it's time to try these meetings, and my dad had been in AA for 20 odd years, 25 years at that time, and I rang him when I was out in Australia and things started to go bad with my mental health, and and he kind of made the suggestion of AA, and I just thought to myself, there's no way I would ever go to AA because it's it's for religious people and
yeah,
it's for people that are weak and can't do it on their own. I'll do it on my own. And by the time I got back from Australia, I finally surrendered. I had that emotional rock bottom, and I went to my first AA meeting that night in London, and I've stayed sober ever since. And it was the best decision that I've ever made was going to that meeting. And back to our original point about change, not only did I get the sense of hope from my first meeting that many newcomers get, but I also realized very quickly that, the alcohol and the drugs that I'd been using were medication for myself. They'd been what I'd been using for so many years to medicate myself. And obviously not having those for a year had meant that I'd become really, really unwell and I needed a new medicine. And I
Mm,
could see, like, because I'd done a lot of reading about spirituality and about, mental health and therapy and stuff like that. I could see that the process of going through the steps was going to be the medicine that I needed. And I didn't quite realize how amazing the medicine would be and what that process would look like. But then when I went through the process, yeah, it was just amazing, transformative. And you can't, that's why it's called a spiritual experience, because you can't. It's your own personal experience. You can't
yeah.
give that to somebody and say, there you go, have that. It has to be experienced yourself, and it's different for every single person. And that's the amazing thing for me, is how individualistic recovery is,
Yeah.
dependent on everything. Dependent on your worldview, your religious and political views, your how you how you work that program into your daily life. It's very dependent on you as an individual.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting because it's sort of like that. I'm sure everyone's heard that or thought of that idea, if God was real, why doesn't God reveal itself to everyone? And my thinking is there is no one symbol or sign or that could happen where we would all be like, oh yeah, that's it. Right? Like, and even when something miraculous happens, like these moments of serendipity, or it's like, God, give me a sign, and then all this crazy stuff happens, even then it's sort of hard to recognize because it's your mind wants to dismiss it or chalk it up to something irrelevant, right? And but when you're talking about a spiritual experience, I wanted to write a book called Evidence of God and have people like send in their stories of like what you're talking about, these little like God, like little, it's like a little wink from God, but it's so personal that like my stories when I was like, oh my, that was God. Like I could tell the story and it wouldn't make sense to anybody else because it was so personal to me. Like
Yeah,
only me and God would get it, right?
yeah,
And and I do appreciate that, we have to run the experiment for ourselves. We don't get healed through osmosis. It is helpful to hear other people's experiences because it's like a trail of breadcrumbs, so to speak. And but we have to run the experiment for ourselves and really test it out because like, I was like you, I need something of evidence. I need evidence. Like
yeah,
I fancy myself a logical science girl. Like having faith didn't really help me. Like I needed some cold hard, I needed some facts.
yeah,
I needed some facts. But when it ended up happening is that I would have these experiences. One of my I think I wrote about in the book. I don't know if you saw the story, but this moment where I was pregnant with my second child. My husband had been laid off from his job and we were headed for financial ruin. And I thought we were going to lose our house and it was all bad. And I was like, what is the lesson here? What is the lesson? Like I was, and finally, and I didn't realize it, but I had really tied my identity and my self-worth to being a homeowner. Like we owned a house in Silicon Valley, which is no small feat. But my identity was tied to like, this is the thing that made me respectable or worthy. I think it was about worthiness because that's something that I had always struggled with. It was this worthiness. And when it finally came down to it, I finally surrendered to this idea that, I was sharing at meetings and things like that, and it would relieve some pressure, right? Just connecting with others. But I was like, this can't be the lesson that I have to lose my house to understand that I'm worthy. And I just was like, at some point, I just was like, you know what? I surrender. If we're gonna lose our house, then so be it. I just couldn't wrestle with it anymore. Like it was exhausting. And it was this was happening right around Christmas time. And we were going to go to my sister-in-law's house, who she is a lovely person, salt of the earth, just kind-hearted, but also like very successful. She had this big, beautiful house and was hosting the whole family. And I just felt so less than. It was kind of funny. I didn't realize it was like both tied to houses. But I mean, like we didn't have any money and I wasn't going to be able to bring anything for dinner. And I felt so bad about that. But I had to leave the house to run an errand. And I went out to my car and it had been drizzling that day. And I noticed that there was something wrapped in plastic under the windshield of my car. And I went to pull it out and I unwrapped it. And it was a gift card for $100 to the grocery store. I was like, yeah. And it was sent, it is somebody, it was anonymous. I don't know who it was from, but I stood there weeping. Like I got it to my core that no matter what, we were going to be cared for. And that my worth wasn't based on how much money I had or if we were going to lose our house, that I was still loved. Like I was still worthy of love. Someone took the time and spent the money to bless me anonymously. And it was such an intense experience. It felt like a spiritual experience. And I knew someone from my community, heard how scared and sad I was and just wanted to do something nice for me. And I was like, yeah. And I was many
That's
years
unbelievable.
sober. I think I was like 8 or 9 years sober by the time I had my first kids. I was probably a good 10, 12 years sober when this happened. So it's interesting, like I continued as we've been talking about how we grow and change and evolve. It was like this was one of those things where I had to let go of my old ideas, right? Like I was like the bondage of
Yeah.
self when we say
Yeah.
these prayers about relieve me of the bondage of self. I don't do these things willingly. Like this was not a lesson I would have signed
Yeah.
up for, but I was so grateful to have it. It was painful, but it was a lesson in acceptance and surrender.
Yeah, like these lessons and the way that they come to again come to people again, it's very individualistic, isn't it? And
Yeah.
the thing that off the back of those three experiences that I had that actually made me realize that this was to do with God was I was in a meeting one day and somebody shared um, the quote from Einstein that coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous.
Yeah.
Well, the moment that those words left that person's mouth, it was like a bomb went off in my head because I was just like, one considered one of the most intelligent people to ever live has said that when coincidences happen, that's God's way of remaining anonymous. And like you said, it's a wink to say, I'm here kind of thing. And I was like, well, that's what's been happening to me. And then I thought, what about all the times that it's happened and I haven't even acknowledged it, Because as time's gone by in recovery, it happens all the time. Like, and I mean just on a day-to-day basis. Like, and a perfect example is so I'm really into jujitsu. This is my club, by the way, on this side.
And
Shout out.
yeah, I know the first thing I was like, oh, you're going to jiu-jitsu. You just came back.
Manifest Brazilian Jiu Jitsu in Rouge. Let's shout out to them. So I was on the way. I was on the way to Jiu Jitsu on Monday, and prior to that, I'd been thinking about like there's this particular like sweep that I'd seen this professional do, and I was like, I really need to learn how to do that. And I was thinking about certain, so like you play different positions, and there's a position called guard, and I was thinking about attacks from guard, and I need to learn some attacks and stuff. Anyway, I get to the class, and the class is all about this. The class is literally my instructor was doing everything that I wanted to happen. It's just one example. Like this happens all the time, though. Like when I'm in the flow, when I'm like doing
Mhm.
basically when I'm doing everything that I'm supposed to be doing. I wanted to talk about that actually quickly about like what actually is required for me to remain sober and well.
Yeah.
But when I'm doing all the things that I need to do, I'm in the flow of life in general. And so I'll think about something happening and it'll just happen. I'll whatever direction I'm thinking, you know, the day's going to go in, it'll just happen, and and I'm just flowing through life, and that is how my life has become when I'm well. But to remain well, um, there's a lot of things that I need to do. Like I have to, the first thing that I have to do when I get up in the morning is I've got to like hand it over. I've got to pray, and even if that's not a formal get down on my knees and pray, that's just like a thought process of like handing it over just to the universe, like whilst I'm brushing my teeth or when I'm driving in the car or whatever. Like that has got to happen. Ideally meditate in the morning as well if I can. So if I can fit it in the morning, but if I'm not, you know, if I'm not running around after my daughter in the morning and stuff, then try and get a meditation in. I need to speak to people. I need to like pick up the phone and ring people, sponsees or my sponsor. I need to go to at least 2 to 3 meetings a week just to kind of keep in there with the meetings and, you know, and try and give back. I need to take inventory every night before I go to bed. I need to try and meditate again before I go to bed, and then say thank you in some, you know, in a kind of form of prayer again, whether that's getting down on my knees or whether that's just getting into bed and saying thanks, you know, in my mind. You know, like you hear people talk about like, oh, you know, when I pray, I have to pray out loud, or when I pray, I have to get down on my knees, or I think that the formal process of doing anything, like I think getting down on your knees and saying it out loud is probably the best way to do it if you can do it that way. But it doesn't mean that you have to. I think it's more to do, again, it's an individualistic thing, and it's more to do with the sentiment of it. Like, you know, a lot of this stuff just goes on in my mind. It isn't out there in the world necessarily. Um, I think a lot of that process goes on in the meetings and when I'm having the telephone conversations, because obviously then I'm talking about it. Like now we're having this conversation. That's when, you know, it kind of it's out there. But most of it is just to do with like what my frame of mind is. Like, am I being honest in my thought processes? Am I being honest in the way that I'm living my life? Am I being, you know, the honesty, open mindedness, and willingness they talk about, like the how of the program. That's very important for me. Like, if I start to be dishonest or I start to be a bit shady in certain areas, that will affect me negatively. If I start to be closed minded to anything, pretty much, that'll affect me negatively. If I stop being willing to do anything again, you know, if I stop being willing to go training for jiu-jitsu, if I stop being willing to go to work and do my job, if I stop being willing to try my best in my relationship, all these things start to affect me negatively. And eventually I get to a place where I'm just really uncomfortable. I'm in a lot of pain mentally and emotionally. And that's when I start to pick up anything that will change the way that I feel, you know, and whether that is something as innocuous as buying clothes on the internet, or whether that is looking at porn, or whether that is who you know over exercising, eating loads of sugar. Like there's so many things.
I was just about to say eating less of sugar.
That's the one. Yeah, I mean the sugar thing is the one for me that's over the last 10 years has been the worst. That's been the way that I kind of like really do medicate myself in a negative way with chocolate and sweets and stuff. And more recently,
mine currently is buying skincare off of Amazon.
Well, mine's just
My
buying.
skin looks amazing.
Yeah, you do. Your skin does look amazing. Mine's like, you know, have you got the app Vinted over there?
Minted? No.
Vinted with a V.
Uh-uh.
No, well, you might have it, and if you do, I'm sorry for ruining your life right now. But if you get that,
I'm taking notes. What is that again?
So it's like eBay, but it's just so much better, and it's primarily for clothes, and like you just get things like you get really nice stuff really cheaply, and it's just you know, my addiction to that has been terrible over the last couple of years. But that, you know, these are the things that you have a laugh and a joking about these things in recovery, because you go, well, you know, I'm not drinking and I'm not taking drugs and I'm just doing these things. But the serious side of that is you are, whatever it is that you're addicted to and that you're obsessed with, you're avoiding what's actually going on inside. You're essentially avoiding the growth, because until you deal with that that's going on internally, you won't actually grow. And
Yeah.
there's been so many lessons I've had to learn. Like, and as I said before, it's not like I've arrived anywhere or I've achieved anything. Like the lessons continue. It's just about how for me, on the personal level, it's about slowing down and
Mhm.
really starting to consider the effect of my actions and how, like, where is this leading? Like, where are these behaviors leading to? Are they leading to a place where I'm gonna be happier and the people around me are gonna be happier, or is it leading to a place that eventually is going to end up in something bad for me or the people around me? And I have to really stop myself and think that way, because in the moment I'm thinking, well, this is great. you know, it's giving me a dopamine hit. It's doing something for me right now that feels good. So therefore
Yeah.
it must be good. And it's not, it's like even with the chocolate thing, like it's never good. There's no
Yeah.
positive to eating a massive bar of chocolate.
Are you sure?
Whereas, like the odd, like if I was to eat like the odd little square of chocolate, that wouldn't be a problem. But that's not
Listen,
what
who eats a square? What kind of maniac eats a square? This is really interesting though, because as you're talking about, I love the whole, like, my head's gonna explode. The idea of cause and effect for me, like I take an action, I get an effect, right? Like running the experiment. I love the way your thought process is, where you're like, what I'm taking these actions, where is it going to lead? Like you're playing it forward. And recently, I've really been, I discovered this guy on YouTube, Joe Hudson, and he does something called emotional inquiry. I love his channel. I'm like, I got a boner for Joe Hudson because he's always talking about emotional inquiry, which is about what am I avoiding? And he's famous for this saying that it's like joy is the mother of all emotions. And if you don't accept her, she's not going to enter a house where her children are not accepted. And I was like, oh, that's so good. And so lately I'm thinking, what is it that I'm trying to avoid in this moment? Every time I reach for my phone to check social media, it's like I hate social media, but it's like I'm so like addicted to it, like this compulsion. Whenever I start to feel uncomfortable, it's like I feel pressure or tension. My immediate knee-jerk reaction, my response is to reach for my phone and distract. And I'm trying to ask myself, what is going on inside? Like, what feeling am I avoiding? Because for me, like the purpose of obsession or addiction is distraction. But the question then is like, from what? Like, what is so unacceptable in this present moment? It's usually a feeling, like some sort of discomfort. And I'm so hardwired to I have a friend that calls it escaping the present. She's like, we all have these little escapes. We escape the present moment. But I'm like, why? What is it? And to like try to get curious and try to like lean into it, like let that feeling get bigger. It's like contrary action. It's a challenging. I'm not always successful at it, hence the plethora of skincare. But
Well, you may agree or disagree with this. I'm not sure, but what I learned through Vipassana meditation, which was the meditation technique that I learned initially in my early recovery, and I then went on and did a 10-day silent meditation retreat back in
10
2000.
days,
Yeah, I think it was like
dude.
2018,
That's some
and the
black
whole
belt recovery shit.
yeah, well, it was an
Intense.
amazing experience, and I'd love to say that I've continued on with it, but I've struggled with meditation over the last few years. I've not done it as much as I used to back then. But what I learned, and like I said, you may agree or disagree with this. So the original the meditation that they teach is what they say was the Buddha's meditation. So the Buddha taught this meditation to his disciples, and that has been carried on through obviously over the millennia to the present day. So there's many people across the world that swear by this, and they go on these. It's like the minimum is a 3 day, and then there's 10 day, there's a month, there's 3 months, there's 6 months, and then I think there's even as long as a year. And you
Where
know
you
the
don't
guy,
talk, like you don't talk for.
yes,
I think I would die.
yeah,
I'm pretty sure.
but yeah, 10 days was long enough. But you know the guy Noah Yuval Harari who wrote
Oh yeah, yeah,
*Sapien*.
yeah.
So he's banging to this, and he does it. I think he does six, either 3 or 6 months of every year. He does this Vipassana retreat, and
That's wild.
basically, what the Buddha taught and what this meditation technique is all about is when you get to when you get present and you get to that state of just being with yourself, what happens, what bubbles up from within, from whatever you want to call it, consciousness, the soul, whatever it is that is our essence. There is things that bubble up from that. So essentially, everything that you've ever accumulated across all your lifetimes, because obviously they believe in reincarnation as well, and you could be going back hundreds, if not thousands, of years.
Mm.
All that is accumulated within your consciousness. So when you are reaching for the social media, or you're reaching for the skincare, or you're reaching for the chocolate or whatever, you're avoiding your emotions, but it's much, much deeper than just I've got an emotion in the present moment.
Hmm.
And they
Oh
say they
yeah.
say that the only way to eradicate that is by practicing that particular form of meditation. So that was why the Buddha taught it, was because that's the process that apparently he went through to attain enlightenment. And there's a specific technique that they teach you, which is to basically identify these bubbles or whatever you want to call them, and you kind of like you focus on them, and eventually, as they all disappear, you eventually attain nirvana, enlightenment. um I practiced it. Obviously, I went through the process, and on the fifth day or the sixth day, and they say that you may have a breakthrough. I did have a breakthrough. I did have that experience of like attaining the nirvana state. It only lasted for probably like maybe 30 seconds to a minute or something like that. But it showed me that that is definitely possible. So I kind of came away from that retreat thinking, okay, so if you really did dedicate yourself to that practice, it's certainly an achievable state. And I did continue to practice it for years afterwards. And what it did for me was it certainly made me much calmer and much more able to sit with those emotions, and to like kind of feel things as they were coming up and process them in the moment, and not reach for things as much. It definitely had a positive effect. But as I said, just kind of prior to COVID, I kind of started to slip out of the habit, and then COVID completely ruined my daily routine, and I just stopped meditating. Really, I just, like, you would have thought that I used it as like a retreat because I was obviously in lockdown, but it had the opposite effect, and all my
Yeah.
negative behaviors came out. Um, and what that taught me goes back again to this idea of like having a program and having routine. I've realized that for me, I need to be super disciplined. If I want to be the best version of myself, and I want to be, well, mentally well and emotionally well, I have to be very, very vigilant with everything that
Yeah.
I do. I almost have to treat it like I'm like an Olympian, like the Olympians that are, training for years and years for the Olympics. Obviously, they're like super disciplined and super routine with everything that they do because they're training so hard for this thing. And that's how I've started to see my life now. It's like I have to be at that level as best as I can, um, and just be really rigid with it. And I talk to some people about it, and they're just like, Jesus Christ, like, give yourself a break. But it doesn't work, because if I give myself a break and I start to go on that slippery slope of not meditating, not praying, not taking inventory, not speaking to people, not sharing at meetings, not doing service, like all these things that I've been taught that have really helped me. If I stop doing those things, I just start to feel terrible.
Yeah.
So it's not worth it. It's just not worth it. I'd rather just do the things that I know work for me and feel good and have serenity. Because ultimately, the one thing that you get out of doing all this stuff is you get a serene mind, and
I was just
that's
gonna say, discipline is actually freedom. Like people think of it
yeah,
as this hard, grindy, rigid and, I don't know, negative thing, but it leads to freedom, right? Like, do
yeah,
you know who Jocko Willink is? He's a
yeah. Of
snake.
course I do. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, of course you do. Of course you do. He's a jujitsu guy. But yeah,
Mm.
he's often talking about how discipline is freedom. Like, we do all these things. And it's so funny because as you're talking about all the things that you do. I used to think of myself as like this really easygoing girl. I'm not high maintenance, I'm not one of those girls that has to get her hair done all to get, on any of that stuff. But I am so high maintenance because we have, I learned in neuroscience that we all have something called the default mode network. It's like the neural circuits that were established as you were growing up are repurposed in adult life. Right. So we're repurposing these neural circuits. And so the practices that we do, I do all the same things you do. I have a 5-minute journal. I don't I'm think like as you were talking, I was like, I don't think I really do a formal prayer. Yeah, but I do meditate. And I journal. I do like a gratitude list. I send it to a friend, so I'm connecting, and then I do the podcast and coaching clients. I'm always talking to people about recovering, like reconnecting. So I was like, and if I stop doing those things, like vacation is really an interesting thing for people in long-term recovery, right? It's like we think, oh, we're going to go on holiday. We're going to go to this new place. And I'm always like, I'm going to bring my 5-minute journal. We'll have all the time. Like we went to Europe for a couple of weeks and I was like, we can like do sit-ups and push-ups in the hotel room. It's like, we don't need a lot of space. We were doing like a lot of yoga and stuff and do a damn thing. I don't think I said hi to God once. I'm not even so much as say, hey, but yeah, it was funny. It's like when you go on vacation, like all bets are off. I forget that I'm who I am.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is as well is that I've been on holiday and done the opposite, where I've gone abroad and I've taken my program with me and I've had the most
Mm,
wonderful experiences. I've gone to
yeah.
meet. I met a guy, another God moment. I went to Spain with my family. I went and found this beautiful little meeting in the middle of a historic Spanish town, which was lovely. Got talking to this guy, and it turned out that he knew a guy from Canada that that I'd spent time with over in Gran Canaria. So like there
So
was this
weird.
this crazy connection of these. They both worked in the shipping industry, and this guy Andrew had actually stayed on my friend's boat out there in Gran Canaria. And I was like, oh my God, what are the chances of this happening? And
Yeah.
there was a woman in the meeting who who shared about a son being a filmmaker and all this kind of stuff. And then about a year later, I was listening to a podcast of a guy, I can't remember his name now, who I used to listen to all the time, who I really liked. And he had her on his podcast as a guest.
What?
Yeah, I was like, oh my God, I met that woman in Spain. It's like all these things that
Wow.
happen. And again, it's because I made the effort to go to the meeting. It's like when I went to Turkey, there were no meetings over in Turkey, so those things couldn't have happened. But I could have gone to the reception in the hotel and said, can I put up a sign saying that if there's any friend of Bill's, can we have a meet? There's loads of effort that I could have gone to that I'm sure of all the thousands of people that are in this hotel, there will have been some people in recovery the same as me, and I could have,
Yeah.
these are the things that I could have done and I didn't. And then I've missed out on, experiences and opportunities to have these beautiful experiences of like, there is definitely more going on than meets the eye. We are all connected.
Yeah.
My book that I wrote was called All Is One, and that is because we are all one. We're all connected via this thing that I, choose to call God.
Yeah. Naming it, I think, is problematic for people because it's almost like I heard that if you have a problem with God, you probably have a problem with somebody else's God. And when I first when I first got sober, I was really worried about it. I grew up in the Christian church and had some issues with that. And my sponsor's like, here, let's do this. She's like, make two lists. Make a list of all the things that you want God to be, like your ideal God, like if you could pick it, write all the positive things down, and then write all the things that you don't want God to be. And I was like, so I did the exercise, not knowing. And when I was done, I handed it to her and she tore it down the center and handed me the positive list. She's like, just start with this. And I was like, you can do that? Because I was taught you cannot do that. Like there was a specific regimented, this is what it is, this is what the book says, and anything that deviates that is not it. And by the way, everybody has to do this, or otherwise something very terrible is going to happen in perpetuity. Right. And that like never made any sense to me. But then when she was like, that just started me on this idea of really basic of love and energy and this idea of connectedness, and I like the science angle of it. And it's interesting how, like, when you think about matter, even air is matter, right? And so one cell molecule is next to the other, is next to the other. We're all, you know, in theory, separated, but we're actually still all connected, like literally.
Yep.
And I
Yep.
saw
And
this fascinating thing on Netflix about the theory of entanglement.
yeah.
Where have you seen that? That the idea is that if two particles were ever connected, like in close proximity, they could be separated across the world and still have an effect on each other. And when you were talking about like when you thought about somebody, like like I hear if you want someone to think about you is to think about them a lot, and
Yeah.
you will come to mind. It's like we real and that's like if you say a blessing to somebody, they receive it, and if you wish them hate, they receive it. But everything that you send out comes back to you tenfold. Like
Yeah.
these are like laws of the universe that like we're exposed to. And listen, you've been sober a really long time. 15 years is a long time. Like you hold these ideas and then you see it play out.
Yes.
And then it's like, whoa, that's like a spiritual experience to me when you actually seeing it play out.
Definitely. And like that's what you get from recovery about praying for the people that you've got, issues with, that you don't like or that you may even hate, praying for those people. And when you first told that, you think, oh my God, I'll never do that. But
I'm
then
all,
you
you
do
mean
it.
slash their tires, right? No. She was
But
like,
you
no.
do these things, and like you said, the experience is that it works, and I've
But when you say it works, it like softens your heart.
yeah,
Yeah.
and you have these, you have, there's a specific, there's been people that I've had that experience where I didn't like them, I've prayed for them, and there's just it's not for them so much as for when I see them, I don't feel the same way that I did before. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
to because ultimately resentment and rage and hatred only hurts you, doesn't it? Like it doesn't hurt them unless you're outwardly verbally aggressive or violent. You've got all this negativity within you, and that hurts you. So to be able
Yeah.
to see those people and not feel that way is wonderful. But I've always struggled with I've always struggled with it, just the word God. I don't use it very often. I usually say higher power. And even now, I just I don't like the word simply because of the connotations, and
Yeah.
also like when you say it, you don't know how that's affecting other people that are hearing that word.
Mhm.
And it conjures up so many different images in people's minds. But ultimately, for me, there is a guiding force in the universe that is essentially positive and is creative and is building the universe that we're part of. So, it's just I just see it as a creative force that I'm part of. And I can either tap into that power and become creative myself and enjoy life, or I can choose not to tap into that power and experience life without that creativity and and the kind of joy that creativity brings. And my experience is that life without it is dull and
Yeah.
boring and leads down the wrong path to, ultimately to kind of self-destruction. And my life with that power in it leads me to better and better places. So I choose to try and tap into that power.
Have you read Julia Cameron's book called The Artist's Way?
Yes, many years ago.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, I keep it near my I keep it by my desk and I read there she's got all these affirmations and I'm really struck by this idea of creativity. In it it says one of the affirmations is creativity is God's will for me.
yeah.
And I love that. I was reading it all through writing the book and just getting in and I realized that like being in that flow state is being like having that connection of energy
She's the
and
morning pages
yeah,
person. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's she just republished her 30th anniversary of that book. And
Do you
but
know,
I
with all this stuff, like with all that kind of with anybody that's kind of, like what's that other book called? You used to speak about it all the time.
was like the Course in Miracles
Yes,
or
Course in Miracles.
yeah.
It's like all these books. Like I may not have read every single one of them, but I've kind of dipped my toe into, like, anytime anybody mentions anything, I'm always like, oh, I'm really intrigued, and I read all that stuff. Um, and it's all really, really helpful. Like, I've never been able to follow anything in the same way that I've followed the 12 steps. So
Right.
when I was taught, like when I was taken through the 12 steps and then I was taught to kind of pass that on to others, I've been able to maintain that. But anything else I've learned or anybody else has ever showed me, I've never been able to kind of like integrate that into my recovery. I don't know why, but it's
I
just
think
that's
you do, though. I think you do
oh
because
maybe.
of, yeah. I mean, because there's this thing, I heard this saying recently, like there's no new messages, just different messengers, right? And
Yeah,
so everything that you've been saying, like the Course in Miracles is basically, to summarize in a very poor way, is like there's either love or fear, and we get to choose what are we going to, and that's, I see you doing that. Like you live it in practice,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because everyone's kind of saying the same thing, just in a different way.
Yes, they are. Yeah, and that's why I keep going back to this idea of an individualistic program. It's like it is the same. It's all the same messages. It just depends on how you want to integrate that into your life, and that is the basic message. What you just said right there, isn't it? You can either choose love or you can choose fear. People often say like, "Oh, hate is the opposite of love," but hate comes from fear. Fear is. I mean, I've got it tattooed on my knuckles. I've got
I
a
was going to
lot of.
ask you. Yeah.
I've got fear tattooed
Oh,
there.
fear. Yeah.
But mine actually says fear none and love them on each hand. But that's what, like all the tattoos that I have some sort of significance when it comes to like that kind of thing. And it's just, they're just kind of like reminders. But it's so true. Like, I've in any circumstance, I've got the opportunity to choose the loving path, or I've
Mhm.
got an opportunity to give into the fearful path.
Yeah.
And you know, until until I make the right decision, I'll keep having to go through that lesson over and over and over again until I actually learn to take the loving path, and
Yeah.
then I kind of end up in the flow of life, and things work out.
I feel like, that's kind of been the theme of my recovery, right? But I don't get upset about it anymore. Like once I'm on the path and then I stray and then I just recognize now it's like, oh, it's time to get back. Like there's not a lot of judgment about it. It's like, oh, it's just, oh, here we are. Let's go back. It's like not a
Yeah,
big deal. Tara Brock, she's a meditation teacher and she talks about the second arrow. That's where I heard it first. It's like we have a feeling and then we judge ourselves for having the feeling, and the judgment towards the feeling is like the second arrow. It's like we experience pain and then we're like, here, let me make it worse.
yeah, that's good.
And when you were talking about praying for others, what came up for me was this. I have this, I don't know where it came from. I don't think it's probably not an original idea, but that we can't escape the measuring stick that we judge others by. Right. And so if I'm judging somebody for whatever, being prideful, self-centered, whatever, it sort of boils down to if you spot it, you got it. Right. And so I'm
Yeah.
recognizing that people are mirrors. I'm just recognizing something about myself that I've exiled and buried. But that sort of infers judgment, self-judgment. Like I'm not accepting a part of myself. And so I think it's so brilliant that we are taught to pray for somebody that we're angry at. And as we do that, that judgment that we have towards our exiled parts of ourselves, like that fades and we experience relief.
Yeah, I love that.
Well, John, I'm so glad we had a chance to. I was just like, hey, it's time for a chat, and you're just like, okay.
Yeah, thank you. No, thanks very much. I always really appreciate having our conversations, and yeah, I get a lot from it. So thanks for inviting me on, and keep doing what you're doing because it's a great podcast, and you're
Thanks, friend.
doing good work in the world.
You too. Yeah. Thanks for spending some time with me. We'll have to do this again real soon.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great day.
Take care. Bye bye.
One last thing before you go, you can follow the podcast on Instagram for daily inspiration at ODAT Podcast. And if you'd like to get a biweekly email from me with recommendations to books I'm reading, meditations I love, or other recovery podcasts, just sign up for it at odatchat.com. That's ODAAT chat.com. And if you do, I hope you enjoy it.